Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on boxing. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the resumes and careers of Junto Nakatani and Shakur Stevenson, just to try to debunk some of the hate, criticism, and, of course, ignorant American mentality that we see on this YouTube boxing community and around boxing as a whole. So stay tuned to that. We're going to break it down. Feel free to leave your comments and your opinions in the comment section. See you after these short. Welcome back. So, as I said, today I was watching videos and I noticed that some people started to put shade and hate towards Junto Nakatani based on not his performance yesterday, because his performance was dominant. He was able to establish his distance with his jab, control the distance on his opponent, and then he was able to win on the inside as well, out fighting the Thai fighter on the inside, landing cleaner hooks and breaking him down. So he showed the ability to fight both on the inside and the outside, and eventually stopped this opponent that he was facing. And I hear people talking about how come his opponent wasn't criticized? Well, in truth, if you actually watch the sport of boxing and you weren't just busy trying to push out racial narratives, you would have noticed me talking about these fight cards probably for the last month. And consistently, I pointed out that his opponent was one of the weaker opponents on these doubleheader cards, because that's what it was. It was a doubleheader card on coming out of Japan, obviously with Inui's brother headlining one and Junto Nakatani headlining the other, with the possibility of a unification match between these two fighters, which potentially could lead to a Junto Nakatani Monster Inui super fight in Japan. Of course, Inui's brother ended up losing, so now we're not sure exactly where Junto Nakatani is going to go from here. He did call out the other three champions, all Japanese fighters, post-fight, so we will see. Obviously, I do expect that he's going to be unifying against one of the other three champions at the 118-pound division. And I saw people criticizing him because of his opponent and saying, well, imagine if that was Tank Davis. See, always trying to fucking justify and clickbait for Tank Davis. Whereas Tank Davis is the face of boxing. Junto Nakatani is not called the face of boxing, not even in Japan. In Japan, that's Inui, right? He's just a fast-rising up-and-comer who people think potentially could be one or possibly the best fighter in Japan. And we will see if he does get in the ring with Inui, because that will prove it right there. It'll be like Spence versus Crawford. That's the kind of fight that is. It's a huge mega fight in Japan. Actually, it's a bigger fight in Japan than Spence and Crawford was in the US. But this guy pointed out that this Thai fighter's resume was, smoke and mirrors. But I said that. And if you watch boxing, you know that the majority of Thai fighters, their resumes are smoke and mirrors. It doesn't mean they're not good fighters, because often they're very good fighters. The problem is that when they're in Thailand to stay busy, a lot of times they're fighting less than stellar opposition. They're staying busy against, so-and-so fighters to get paychecks, right? And so it is what it is. A lot of times their resumes aren't that good. This is nothing new. And it's funny because historically you could look at a lot of Americans and they have the same kind of resumes, very shit resumes against lots of mediocre opponents. Of course, when we're trying to criticize a non-American, we look past that and we ignore it and we make it about Tank Davis. Yet the irony is, Canelo Alvarez, who has the best resume in boxing, is the most accomplished fighter in the sport today. He's the most hated and criticized fighter in boxing. But somehow this is a race thing. Tank Davis is getting criticized because he's black. And Junto Nakatani is being hyped up and not criticized because he's not black. Yet Lomachenko was ripped from the first fucking day he stepped into the professional ring. Golovkin was constantly ripped and ridiculed from his first American debut, right? Inui, once he got onto Americans' radar, has got nothing but hate and criticism from these fans ever since he became a top name in boxing. And of course, it's no surprise now that Junto Nakatani is starting to get the same kind of hate because now he is becoming relevant. These casual boxing fans finally know who he is. And of course, he's not black. So we got to find some way to discredit and hate on him. The irony is he fought his mandatory, right? And yeah, if you watch my channel and many other people's channel, we highlight the fact that these sanctioning bodies often mandate opponents that are garbage, right? It's ironic because William Skull just actually had Canelo Alvarez stripped, and people were fucking happy about it. They were happy Canelo got stripped because he didn't fight William Skull. Yet if he fought William Skull, he would have got shit on and criticized and ridiculed for fighting this unknown opponent, right? That's the kind of toxic fucking environment, this whole American YouTube boxing community is, right? With Tank Davis, these guys try to turn him into a star, the face of boxing, right? But yet they don't want to hold him to the same level of criticism and expectation of other top fighters in boxing. It's ironic because what people are pushing for is Nakatani to fight a Nui, a pound-for-pound fighter. But he's not doing what he should do in the sport of boxing. He's not fighting good opponents. He's cherry picking and getting fucking weak opponents on his resume. But yet the criticism Tank Davis gets isn't the opponents he's fighting. It's the fact that he's consistently putting these weaker opponents that are not high-level fighters, and it's easy to know who's going to win the fight on pay-per-view, right? That's the real criticism Tank Davis gets from a lot of boxing fans. The fact that regardless of who he fights, it's always going to be on pay-per-view, even though it's not an opponent that generates pay-per-view, right? When he fought Ryan Garcia, nobody was moaning and groaning about that because we knew that was going to generate pay-per-view buys. Frank Martin said was a good fighter, but he doesn't draw pay-per-view buys. He's never fought a top 10 lightweight, right? But today, we're going to take a look at two fighters that are in very similar situations. Junto Nakatani, the Japanese three-weight world champion, and Shakur Stevenson, the Black American three-weight world champion. And it's interesting to look at these two in comparing and contrast because obviously, apparently both of them now are being compared to Tank Davis, right? Tank Davis, who's obviously older than both of them. So you would think that Tank Davis has done a lot more than they have, right? I saw literally people criticize Better BF because he's 39 years old and hasn't done that much. And then they're asking, why is Tank Davis being criticized? He's just 29 years old, turning 30. So literally 10 years younger than Better BF. But the irony with that statement is both of them have been pros for 11 years. Both of them have been pros for 11 years. And Better BF's resume is fucking way better than Tank Davis. He's become undisputed in a weight division. He's fought quality opposition, killers. And the majority of those fights weren't on pay-per-view, right? A clear difference in what one fighter is doing compared to what another fighter is doing. We know what this guy was doing. He was being fucking protected by Mayweather, fighting flat-footed fucking Latino fighters, right, that didn't really have a chance of beating him so they could sell pay-per-views. Now he's fighting non-Mexican fighters, and those pay-per-view numbers are terrible. So we will see how long that goes on. But nonetheless, this isn't about Tank Davis. We're going to literally look at Shakur Stevenson and check out him and literally, the comparison between him and Nakatani. And I ain't hating on Shakur. I ain't fanboying for Nakatani. This is a legitimate breakdown of these two pound-for-pound fighters. These are two fighters that are really just coming into their prime, right? Literally just coming into their prime. In most sports, 27 years of age is literally your prime. So these two guys are moving into that age. Obviously, Shakur is currently 27. Junto Nakatani is currently 26. They're both three-weight world champions, so they've already accomplished more than Tank Davis has done. They are legitimate three-weight world champions, not WBA, regular champions. They are legitimate champions. You might not like the way they did it or the way they got there, but the point is they got there. They're there. They did it. They've accomplished something. And Shakur has done something Tank Davis hasn't done, which is unify. And if everything we hear about Junto Nakatani is true, his next fight, probably before the end of 2024, is going to be a unification fight. So by 2025, these two fighters are both going to be unified three-weight world champions. Tank Davis is a two-weight world champion who's never unified. So, yeah, you know, as I said, this isn't about Tank, but it's interesting when you compare these other fighters who are also considered pound for pound. And then you wonder why Tank Davis gets criticized. But Shakur Stevenson doesn't really get criticized based on his resume so much. He mostly gets criticized on his style, right? The fact that he is just not engaging or entertaining. Junto Nakatani, on the other hand, is the opposite. He is the Japanese Tommy Hearns of the 118-pound division, right? Long, powerful, explosive. And that's what we saw yesterday on that double header. And isn't that ironic that literally we get the better BF Bivol fight, undisputed light heavyweight, historic, great. And then the 2 days after that, we end up getting a back-to-back Japanese cards, one card with 3 world title fights, one card with 4 world title fights, right? And literally top-level dudes. Junta Nakatani and Kenshiro was on the other card. Both guys that are pound-for-pound-esque fighters. But let's move through this, break it down, talk about it, and see how it goes. As I said, obviously, these are the two guys that really are the face of boxing, specifically in America. And so, you know, when people try to make this all about race, the irony is the guy here that gets criticized and hated on the most is Canelo Alvarez. The guy that gets used the most to get clicks on videos is Tank Davis. Literally, you go to Knockout Boxing and Fan in Boxing and quite a few other channels, and they literally do Tank Davis videos every fucking day, right? And this isn't to criticize Tank Davis or Canelo. Both are great fighters. Both fighters I have on my pound for pound list. Both fighters I enjoy watching. If we really get down to it, I like Tank Davis more than I like Canelo Alvarez. But yet, I still have high expectation for Canelo, even though Canelo's already done everything. Tank Davis, on the other hand, I have high expectations for him too. Yet he's not done anything yet. He's never unified, never tried to become undisputed, hasn't fought pound for pound competition, right? At this point, there's a lot of holes in his resume, a lot of holes in his legacy. Canelo Alvarez is already a surefire Hall of Famer. He could retire tomorrow, doesn't have to fight ever again. And he's literally a 3-weight world champion, 4-weight world champion, and 1-weight undisputed. And has been unified in 3 of the 4 weight divisions where he was a champion, right? And obviously, he lost to 2 great fighters, one being Floyd Mayweather, the other being Dimitri Bivol. And after his fight this weekend, we really have a new enlightenment to really how great he is, right? So when you think Canelo Alvarez lost to these 2 fighters, it's not really a discredit to him. When you fight such high-level opponents, you're going to take losses. The problem with Tank Davis and his team is they don't want to put him in fights like that because they're afraid potentially he might lose. And then are they still going to be able to use him to push pay-per-views? Are you still going to be able to highlight him as the face of boxing? Is he still going to be able to be the face of the PBC if, like Errol Spence and the Charlos and Deontay Wilder, he ends up taking losses or fucking just becomes irrelevant? We will see. I still think they're both great fighters, but obviously the younger fighter, Tank Davis, I expect him to try to do more. People are saying the only reason he didn't fight anyone big in this fight is because everyone's ducking him. But that does not explain the years and years prior to this when he didn't fight any of the top fighters either, right? You can say that now, but what about before? What about before? So, is Nakatani getting hyped because he's an Asian? Because that's what Some people are saying now he's not being criticized because he's not black. He's being hyped up because he's Asian. I'll be back in a minute. I think my Uber is coming. It is. Wait 1 second. Hold your horses. Hi, Lily. Shao Xing, be careful. Okay. I'm back. My lasagna is here. Hee hee hee. So let's get back to this. So the way some people are talking is if the only reason Nakatani is not being criticized and scrutinized the way Tank Davis is because he's not black. But the irony with this narrative is the people that tend to be the most critical tend to be black American fans. You think about those Errol Spence fans who consistently shit all over Bud Crawford's resume, yet still wanted to put Bud Crawford pound for pound #1, even though they spent 5 years saying that he hasn't fought anyone, his resume was garbage, and he fought a bunch of bums. But he was still pound for pound #1, right? And then, of course, now you have Tank Davis fans who are shitting all over Devin Haney, Vasily Lomachenko, Shakur Stevenson. Yet Haney is an undisputed champion, two-weight world champion. Lomachenko's a three-weight world champion who was three-belt unified. And even Shakur Stevenson, the least accomplished out of the three of them, is currently a three-weight world champion who was unified two belts at 130 pounds. So all three of those fighters have done more in their careers than Tank Davis has. Nakatani, people know what he is trying to do. He's moving up, trying to become unified champion at bantamweight, following in Anui's footsteps. He's the guy that literally moved up in weight, trying to get a Bam Rodriguez fight, and Bam literally ducked him, right? People don't talk about that. But when he was a 112-pound world champion, Bam was at 108. Bam didn't jump up to 112 to try to get a Nakatani fight. No, he jumped up to 115 pounds to fight old fighters like Quadras and Rungvisai. And then once Nakatani moved up to 115, right, to try to become a WBO champion, of course, Ioka ducked him, right, and dropped his title to duck Nakatani. What did Bam Rodriguez do? He dropped back down to 112 pounds because, it's too big for him. Only to go to 112 and then struggle to make the weight, only to come back up to 115 after Nakatani moved up to 118. But okay, Nakatani is not doing what he should do. He's not trying to fight the best competition. It's him. It's not other people. It's totally him. Yet, unlike most Japanese fighters, this is a guy who lives and trains in America, right? A guy who, is going to have a green card, obviously, and a guy that is learning the more American style by not focusing only in being in Japan, but literally living in the States. One of the criticisms people had, the ignorant American, is that Inui is limited because he only gets to spar with Japanese fighters. He's never sparred black fighters, so he's just not going to be able to deal with the superiority of the black athlete, right? That's what people said before he knocked out Stephen Fulton. And now he hasn't fought anyone because now Stephen Fulton is nobody, even though prior to fighting Inui, people had him on their pound for pound list. You explain that to me, right? If he beats fucking Funduro at 100 26 pounds now for the second time, is he still going to be irrelevant? Or is he going to be literally a guy that proves how great Inui is? So I'm hoping he wins, because that will be fucking funny as hell for them to try to explain why he's no good anymore. And think about Nakatani. He lives in the States, so he gets to spar American sparring partners, the same as any other American fighter. So that whole narrative is out the door. No longer relevant. It's irrelevant. But let's move forward. So here we go. These two young, great fighters, obviously both pound for pound quality guys. Shakur Stevenson, 27 years old, 22-0 with 10 KOs. One of the slickest motherfuckers in the sport of boxing. A guy that I've said is going to be a perennial pound for pound fighter for the next 10 years. And a guy that, I kind of favor to beat Tank Davis. Even though I like Tank, so I sort of want Tank Davis to win that fight, similar to Beterbiev versus Bivol. I mean, I appreciate Bivol, I respect his skill set, but I like Beterbiev, so I wanted him to win. In a Shakur Tank Davis fight, I wanted Tank Davis to win, because that would be great for boxing. He's a far more exciting fighter, and there's a lot more really intriguing matchups I'd like to see him in. But don't be surprised if skills pay the bills, because unlike Beterbiev, Tank Davis is not a high-volume puncher. And then, of course, you have Junto Nakatani, the 26-year-old Japanese fighter, 29-0 with 22 KOs. He is one of the most exciting young up-and-coming fighters in boxing today, right? People can talk about how Boots Ennis is pound-for-pound top 10. Never fought a welterweight top 10 fighter. Never won a world title, but yet people still had him on their pound-for-pound top 10 lists. But having Junto Nakatani on your list, somehow that's all about race. He's only being pushed there because he's not black. So what about Boots, who is being pushed there? He's only being pushed there. Why? Because he is black. Not because he's accomplished anything. He never won world titles in 3 weight divisions. He never won world titles in 1 weight division when people were doing that. Now he's a champion, but he inherited that belt. He didn't win it, right? It was a vacant title because Crawford moved up to 154 pounds. And this isn't me shitting on Boots Ennis. I love Boots Ennis, and I think, like Shakur, he's going to be on the pound-for-pound list for the next 10 years. This is more about the ignorant Americans. So this is one of many pound-for-pound lists you can find all over. This is the Sporting News. I always like the Sporting News magazine. So this is their breakdown. And it's good because they give you the top 12 fighters. And I like that because, as I always say, there's probably about 12, 15 fighters that really are in the conversation for pound. Like Lomachenko's not on this list, but easily should be on this list. Probably above guys like Teofimo Lopez, right? You also have Ken Shiro, who I just talked about, who easily could be on this list as well. Ken Shiro is literally a 2-weight world champion who's had 14 title defenses, right? A great resume, has beaten, I think, 10 world champions throughout his career, like a real quality fighter. Ioka could have been on this list, but obviously Ioka's dropping off recently. He's just coming off of losing a fight, and he's not the young, dynamic fighter that he once was. So their list, of course, is Usyk number 1. You know JB going to be pissed off because there's no way a non-black fighter could fucking be pound-for-pound number 1. That shit is racist. Even though the reason Usyk is pound-for-pound number 1 is because what he's been doing is fucking undeniable. You beat a guy who's 60 pounds heavier than you, that shit is dynamite, right? And if you don't think it's dynamite, then you should have no problem with Tank Davis jumping up to fight Boots Ennis. You should have no problem with fucking Bud Crawford jumping up and facing Canelo Alvarez. You should have no problem with fucking Inui jumping up and facing Tank Davis, because those jumps are far less significant than what Usyk did against Tyson Fury. And now he's going to rematch him this year. And if he beats Fury again in 2024, he's easily the fighter of the year. 2 wins against fucking Fury, a behemoth, one of the best heavyweights of this era. Inui at number 2, obviously JB going to really fucking hate that. But to be fair, Inouye is far more active than Terrence Crawford is, right? And being active, staying active, is significant. I know some people don't like that because they think once your name is on a list, it should never disappear. But that's not how pound for pound lists are. In any sport, it's based on activity and wins, and moving up and down based on how active you are and what kind of quality wins you get on your resume. Terrence Crawford at number three, as I said, it doesn't matter where you have these three fighters, they are the upper echelon. You could put Crawford at number one, and I have no problem with that. And then put Usyk at number three, Inouye at number two, Inouye at number three, Crawford at number one, Usyk at number two. It's irrelevant. All three of them are significant. They're all two-weight undisputed champions, something that's never been done in boxing history. Congratulations to all three of them. Canelo, I feel, is sliding. He's obviously getting older, and so that's why I don't hate on him fighting big, hungry, young, aggressive fighters, right? And still having successful pay-per-views. Are they the predominantly best fighters he could have? No, but there's literally only one guy you could put on that list that would be significant, and that would be David Benavidez. There's no other light heavyweight or 160-pound fighter, even Bud Crawford, right? You could put him on this list, but is he really a better choice than a Berlanga or Munguia? You think having a guy go from 147 to 168 is a better choice than two naturally bigger guys than Canelo, who are actually fighting at 168? Come on. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a Bud Crawford fan. I'm happy to see him get a huge payday. But I don't know if that's the payday really to get. But, we will see. We'll be talking about him and a potential Tim Tszyu fight later on this week. So stay tuned to that. So I would have Canelo at number 4. I'd probably have him at number 5 or 6, right? And that's not being disrespectful. The fact that he's staying active, he's still a great fighter, right? He's been super active. He deserves to be in the pound for pound list, even if he's not necessarily doing what the guys above him are doing right now. Guys that are younger, outside of Usyk, of course, and Crawford. I mean, they are older than him. But to be fair, he's more accomplished than both of them. Then, of course, you have Beterbiev, who I think right now at this point deserves to be above Canelo Alvarez based on his victory over Bivol, a guy that beat Canelo Alvarez. Bivol at number 6, I can understand him being below Canelo. And then you have Jesse Bam Rodriguez, who literally looks like pound for pound one of the best fighters in the sport of boxing. Off the eye test, you could easily see him being at number 4 or potentially number 5 behind Beterbiev. But I was so impressed by Bivol, and I saw the level of opponent he fought in Beterbiev. I find it hard to see Jesse rated above him. But above Canelo, okay, I could see that. But yet at that point, you'd be at number 6. Canelo would be at number 7. Then, of course, you have Lopez, Teofimo. And I like Lopez, but he's the one outlier on this pound-for-pound list. He's got great victories against Taylor and Lomachenko, but he's also had piss-poor performances and a humiliating loss against George Kambosos, right? George Kambosos that Lomachenko just knocked out. Yet Lomachenko's not on this list, but Lopez is. Yet Lomachenko just beat Lopez recently, right? I don't think Teo really deserves to be this high on the list. If you're going to put him down at number 12, 13, or 14, I'm fair with that. He could bounce back and elevate himself on this list with a big performance against a top-level fighter, against a Haney, right? Against a Howard, against somebody realistically high-level and respected, somebody that people would really get excited about. Even a Ryan Garcia victory. Then, of course, you have Errol Spence. He also should not be anywhere on this list. So Shakur Stevenson and Junto should definitely be on this list above those two, Spence and Lopez. Tank Davis at number 9. Based on this list, it's hard to put Tank Davis above a Jesse Bam Rodriguez, right? And what he's been doing and how good and how dynamic he's looked. I definitely don't think you can put him above Bivol or Beterbiev. But putting him and Canelo right close to each other, I would be cool with that. Because Obviously, one guy is on the way up, one guy is on the way out. And that's not disrespecting Canelo. It's just based on where they are at this point of their careers, right? I mean, if Canelo really wants to elevate himself back to number one in this list, you got to fight guys like Benavidez, rematch a Bivol, or take on a better BF. You take on that level of opponents and you win, then you're going to be right in the conversation for pound number one. If he was to beat better BF, he would become a two-weight undisputed champion like Crawford, Inouye, and Usyk. And he would be right in the mix for pound number one. You fight Benavidez, I definitely think you're right there at number four, right? You fight Bivol coming off of that performance against him. I definitely think it elevates you to like, sorry, not number four, number five, because still think you're below better BF, right? But at number five, you know, that's great level of you know, a great point at this point of your career based on the opposition you faced. If you want to be higher, you need to fight better level of competition. Tank Davis finds himself in this position, right? If you fighting guys like Lomachenko, Shakur, Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez, and you're beating them impressively, you're going to be elevated up that list as well, potentially above Jesse and Bivol, above Canelo, and just behind better BF, right? But yet, that's the level of opportunity or opposition you need to fight to sort of raise up in those rankings. I also think Devin Haney should be on this list above Spence and Teo at this point, right? I know he took a loss against Ryan Garcia, but that loss obviously does not count, so it's hard to use it against him at this point. But let's move forward. So here's a quick breakdown of these two fighters. Both guys are three-weight champions. Shakur is a unified champion and an Olympic silver medalist, which is important. Junto is the more exciting KO puncher, right? He hasn't unified yet, but he's probably going to be unifying before the end of 2024. And as far as a medal winner in the Olympics, well, obviously that's never going to happen. So that's always going to be something that Shakur has as shine, right, in his career. So Shakur Stevenson is 27 years old, and he's fought 3 world champions at this point of his career. 3. He faced Jamal Herring, obviously stopped him. It was a very good victory for a guy moving up into his second weight division. Then he fought Oscar Valdez to unify titles, which was probably the biggest and best win of his career. He won easily, as we figured he would, because skill-wise, he's just a far better fighter than Oscar Valdez. And then, of course, he fought Robson Kansakow, who just recently became a world champion by getting what most people consider a robbery victory over Oshaki Foster. And obviously, those two are going to be rematching soon, and we'll see if he's able to beat Oshaki in the rematch to retain his title. I favor Oshaki Foster to beat him more convincingly the second time around, and then he will fall back into his contender status, where he is more of a contender than an elite fighter. If you look at any 3 of those fighters, none of them are elite. We've obviously saw Jamal Herring be beat. We've seen Oscar Valdez be beaten down on multiple occasions. And as far as Robson Kansakow, he's always a tough out, but he's never quite at the level to be the man, right? Then we get to Junto Nakatani. Sorry, I said 27, but he's 26 years old. 26 years old, and he's fought 7 champions. So he's fought more than twice as many world champions as Shakur Stevenson. Obviously, when he moved up to his second weight division, he defended his title against ex-world champion Francisco Rodriguez Jr. Great fighter, tough, rugged fighter, really gave him a hard fight. He beat him by decision. One of the few guys in recent history to actually go the distance with Junto Nakatani. He moved up to his third weight division, beat Alejandro Santiago, the man who was just coming off of a convincing victory over Nonito Donaire for the vacant WBC title. He beat Donaire. His first title offense, I think it was his first, maybe it was second, was against Nakatani, who fucking flatlined him in sensational fashion. Of course, he faced Andrew Maloney, Andrew Maloney, who has been a world champion as well. Had one of the knockouts of the year in beating Maloney. And literally, if you've never seen that knockout, you got to check it out because that thing was fucking massive, massive. And that was really the fight that really sort of elevated Junto Nakatani to casual boxing fans' sort of scope, right? This is when people started to actually be aware of him and know who he was. Prior to that, when he was at 112 pounds, he was kind of unknown. He was obviously in the shadows of guys like Ioka, Kenshiro, Tanaka, and Anui, right? And obviously, only over the last couple years recently has he really elevated and started to move past a lot of those guys. Then, of course, you have Angel Acosta, hard punching Puerto Rican fighter, right? One of the first guys he defended his title against at 112 pounds. Milan Melindo, multiple weight champion, multiple time champion, really quality veteran name on your resume, right? He beat him early on. That was really the first champion he faced. Obviously, at that point of Milan Melindo's career, he was on the way out, but still a solid fighter with a lot of experience for a young guy coming up, trying to get himself into position to fight for a world title. Seiyo Yuri Akui, currently a world champion at 112 pounds, right? This is a guy that Junto beat early on in his career. Since then, Akui has went on to become a world champion. He recently just made his second title defense. And that's important because we see a lot of guys that are world champions but never have successful title defenses of their belts. Example, Sean Porter, right? Sean Porter is so great, but Sean Porter never had a successful title defense in his career. And there's a lot of guys that fall into that situation, right? Robinson Kansakau probably is going to be similar. He's probably going to lose in his first title defense and become just a contender after that. A guy that people are going to use because of his name recognition to elevate them to bigger fights moving forward. Then, of course, we have Yabuki. Anyone that really follows boxing remembers Ibuki, who was this unknown domestic level Japanese fighter who, of course, was well known in Japan for being tough, hard puncher, and dangerous. He stepped into his first world title fight, sort of being given an opportunity to finally get a world title fight on the world stage against Kenshiro, who'd cleaned out the whole division and was looking to just unify with everybody. Obviously, got a fight with Kayaguchi to unify titles at 112 pounds, 108 pounds. Gonzalez, the WBO champion, blatantly ducked him. And then so he fought this guy, Ibuki, who obviously was given this big opportunity. Ibuki ended up stopping Kenshiro in that opportunity, right, to become a world champion. And then, of course, Kenshiro destroyed him in the rematch. Since then, Ibuki just became a two-time world champion by upsetting South African fighter Yoshinga last week, right? So now not only did he become a one-time world champion, he's recently become a two-time champion, knocking out Noshinga. So, congratulations to him. Obviously that must feel good. He's an older fighter, but dangerous, hard puncher, and a guy that you can't look past because if you do, he's going to knock your ass out and take your belt, which he's done on two occasions right now. So congratulations to him. So 7 world champions on Nakatani's resume. So here we go. Shakur stopped one of the 3 champs he beat. He won 2 belts in the process, right? Obviously beating Jamal Herring to win that WBO belt and then beating Valdez to unify titles at 130 pounds. Junto stopped 5 of the 7 champs he beat. Obviously, he fought Yabuki early on. It was just a 6-rounder, and it went 6 rounds. And then recently, as I told you, Rodriguez, who went 12 rounds with him at 115 pounds. He won 1 belt. Like many fighters that go the WBO route, a lot of the belts he won, like Shakur, were vacant belts. Shakur obviously won his first belt at 126, which was vacant, and just recently won his belt at 135, which was vacant as well. So 2 out of the 4 belts he's won have been vacant belts. Junto is in similar situation. Obviously, when he moved up to 112 pounds, he won that title, which was vacant, defended it against quality opposition, moved up to 115 pounds, won the vacant title because the champion, Ioka, right, literally dropped the title to avoid fighting Junto Nakatani. If that's not one of the biggest ducks in 2023 or 2022, whenever it happened, I don't know what is. That was a huge duck. Didn't get talked about at all because that's the problem. People say, why isn't Junto Nakatani held to the same kind of scrutiny as Tank Davis? Well, because he's also not given as much praise and glory and attention. You don't see people making videos every single day on Junto Nakatani. You don't see people doing that about Inui, right? Who's ranked way higher than fucking Tank Davis. And in Japan is a way bigger star than Tank Davis. Yet you're not seeing videos being made by some channels every single day on him, pushing smoke up his ass to highlight him as being something that he's not, right? That's what happens with Tank. Even Canelo Alvarez, you don't have channels that are making videos every day about Canelo Alvarez or Anthony Joshua or Usyk. There's nobody where there's like this big push to literally make videos about a guy every day to try to make him seem more popular and bigger than he truly is. And then when you throw criticism out there because of what he's not doing, that's the problem. That's the issue. Not the guys that blatantly put out videos every day. Knockout Boxing, Fannin, others put out Tank Davis videos day after day after day after day after day. And there's not that much fucking you can say. But they still do. Right? And as I'm trying to say, this video is not hating on Shakur Stevenson. Not at all. It's trying to show you a comparison between Shakur and this 27-year-old black American fighter who's considered pound for pound, doesn't get as much criticism as Tank Davis does, right? Of course, Tank Davis fans are critical of Shakur, just like Errol Spence fans were critical of Bud Crawford. But generally, there's not as much criticism thrown towards him because expectations haven't been built up the way they have for Canelo or the way they have been for Tank, right? And Tank just hasn't delivered yet. Sorry, that's just the way it is, right? You may not like it, but that's the God honest truth of the situation. So now trying to make this whole Junto Nakatani thing about race, but yet let's make a fair comparison. Let's compare him to a guy in a similar position, Shakur Stevenson. He's fought more champions than Shakur, 7-3. He's a far more exciting fighter with a far higher KO percentage, right? They're both three-weight world champions. That's more than Tank Davis has done. Shakur obviously is unified. Potentially, Nakatani is going to unify this year. That's something that Tank Davis hasn't done. I know people will say, well, he was going to unify, except Lomachenko had no balls and ducked that fight. So does that mean Tank Davis finally grew balls and you, a Tank Davis fan, also grew balls as well? Because literally you've been making excuses for him ducking Lomachenko for 7 fucking years. 7 years. All the way going back to him beating Petraza and being a champion at 130. And he didn't only have to fight Lomachenko. He could have fought the other 2 champions of that weight division as well. And then once Loma moved up, he could have fought one of the 3 champions of that division. Yet he didn't face any of those champions, ever. He was more comfortable pulling guys up from 126 and 122. And now that he's at 135, he's still more comfortable pulling guys up from 130. But people go, look, Canelo Alvarez did it, and he wasn't criticized. That's ego saying that. No, he was fucking constantly criticized. Nobody's been more criticized than Canelo Alvarez outside of potentially Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. Don't talk about Tank Davis because he's not nearly talked about as much as Canelo Alvarez because he's just not that fucking relevant. He's not ranked as high as Canelo on the pound for pound list. He doesn't sell as much on pay-per-view as Canelo Alvarez. He's not doing commercials in America like Canelo Alvarez is, right? He's not the one. He's literally the one getting in back and forth with Turkey Al-Sheikh in Saudi Arabia, whereas they don't really give a fuck about Tank Davis that much. There was talk about him fighting Haney because Haney was pushing for that and had a relationship with Turkey. Outside of that, you haven't really seen them make much of an effort to really try to work with Tank Davis, right? Why? Because he's just not as relevant as Canelo Alvarez is. But somehow this still always comes back down to race. But yet, how's it about race when the guy who gets criticized the most in the sport isn't black? Oh, I mean, it's still about race, right? But it's just not the race narrative you fucking hope people are saying it is. Actually, it's the opposite. It's showing you and your people to really be the racists in this narrative, right? Because now we just looked at Shakur and Junto Nakatani. Junto has just finally become relevant, only now started to be elevated on the pound for pound list, and now is being talked about as a potential Nui fight, right? Just like we're talking about Shakur as a possible opponent for Tank Davis. Huge potential fights for both of them, right? Expectation is, they obviously don't need to take those fights right away. We know that Shakur is probably going to fight Zepeda. And we know that Junto is probably going to unify against one of the other bantamweight champions. But on the upside, there's still those pound for pound quality opponents, big pay-per-view, big money fights that are sitting there for both of them. They're not the ones being hugely criticized because of what they haven't done, because they're not the guys that are the A side in this fucking conversation, right? We saw, of course, ignorant American literally hating on Junto Nakatani because of his last opponent, which is crazy to me that you're going to be pushing some sort of bullshit narrative like that. But who's fucking surprised? It's consistently what we find. I talked about in multiple videos that this Thai fighter's record was, what did they say? Smoke and mirrors. 76 wins, 2 losses. And I point out every single time his only other big fight on his resume was against Nui, who he fought in 2018 and lost that fight. But to be fair, he didn't get knocked out. He went 12 rounds and lost the decision, being clearly outbeaten by Nui. Whereas, of course, Junto Nakatani went in there yesterday, won every single round, and then stopped him in 6. Showing you the disparage between Inui's brother and Junto Nakatani. The fact that Junto is a killer who's able to get guys out there. But of course, the ignorant American just wants to look at the shit opposition that this guy's faced and try to demean Junto Nakatani because he did what the WBC ordered him to do. Fight his mandatory opponent, right? That's the craziness with this situation. We often point to these sanctioning bodies and how they perpetually push mandatories that no one gives a fuck about, right? Like the guy that Tim Tszyu is fighting. This guy was a Charlo mandatory for 3 or 4 years, but they knew he wouldn't sell. So the IBF buried him and never forced Charlo to fight him. But this is the same IBF that pushed and elevated William Skull and forced to strip Canelo Alvarez, right? You can see the skullduggery that goes on with these sanctioning bodies because, that Russian fighter obviously was nothing special. He was fighting on low-level cards, the prelim fights of PBC fight cards, that people got to watch free on YouTube. Whereas William Skull, he ain't even doing that. That dude's literally somewhere in Europe. Nobody's ever fucking seen him in a fight card, right? Now, of course, this Thai fighter gets elevated by the WBC, just like tons of fighters consistently get elevated as mandatories. But the problem isn't the WBC and these sanctioning bodies and the potential, consistent bullshit that they do. No. That's not the problem. The problem is, of course, Junto Nakatani and the fact that he's fighting this guy. as if, he asked to fight this guy, as if that's the level of competition he's been chasing. Let's just take a quick peek right now. I mean, you can see there's many good mandatory opponents, right? Right now, we know Ajit Kabial is being mandated to fight Martin Bakoli to become Daniel Dubois mandatory. That's a fucking great mandatory fight. Great, right? Nobody would ever moan and groan about that. But to be fair, in America, they don't know who fucking Ajit Kabial is. So those guys would probably shit on him as a potential opponent. You look at cruiserweight, Rzeski, Dortukis, Shinkara, Chislak. Not one of those fighters is fucking recognized by the majority of American boxing fans. How is Vostik fucking somehow number one, even though he just lost to David Benavidez? David Benavidez, who had one fight at 175 and somehow now became the interim champion. He never beat anyone at that weight, but of course the WBC elevated him right in to an opportunity to win an interim title. Why? Because they're hoping to strip him or elevate him to a free title like they did with Devin Haney. Morrell is the same. Of course, he was the WBA regular champion at 168, so you can understand a little more why he was pushed into this position. But then you have Albert Ramirez. Albert Ramirez. Nobody knows who that fucking guy is. In this division, where there's quite a few name of fighters, nobody knows who that guy is. This guy, Michael Effort, Connor Wallace, how are these guys ranked ahead of Anthony Yard? Anthony Yard, Ramirez, Hart, Zach Parker, Connor Wallace. Jean Pascal, the dude's 45 years old. Then you go this one, Mimbili, William Skull, Diego Pacheco. The only fighter here that doesn't make sense is fucking William Skull. We've seen Mimbili against high-level opponents put on fucking great performances. We've seen Diego Pacheco, right, consistently move up against quality opposition and impress. We don't know who William Skull is. And they're going to put William Skull versus Vladimir Shishkin to become the IBF fucking champion? Fucking Christ. No one's ever going to watch that fight, and no one's ever going to fucking worry about that belt because it's irrelevant. Here, you got Shane Mosley Jr. as a mandatory. Why? Because they know Lara is done, and they just want to put him in with an opponent that has name recognition. Hamza Shiraz for Carlos and Janibek makes sense. This guy, Etanoso Oliha, who the fuck is that guy? Nobody knows who he is. Spence never fought at 154, but somehow now coming off of a knockout loss, he's number one. Abbas Barao, not a bad fighter. Somehow he is number one. Lubin is in position to become number one. We knew that already because he was trying to get that Tim Tszyu fight. Tim Tszyu, number one here. He deserves that because he was basically sort of fucked over by that Funduro fight, right? Here, Solomon Sissoko, most Americans don't know who he is. Very good fighter. Shakim Gizioff, you're lucky if they know who he is. He's ranked by two of the divisions. Karen, we already seen fucking Jern Ennis fight him. Why is he being fucking pushed again by the fucking IBF? Connor Ben would have been a more interesting opponent because at least fucking he brings some name recognition. Here, Sandor Martin, been there for years. Is he going to get a title opportunity? Who knows? Andy Hiroka, Japanese fighter. No one knows who he is, but it's great that he's now in position. Richard Hitchens, finally there. Barboza, not bad. Guys that actually deserve to be there. Zepeda. People literally criticize Zepeda, but this guy is the number one mandated opponent for every single sanctioning body. Oshaki, Otar Anersian, who? Albert Bardagarian, so they don't have to fight him. They gave him the interim title so that Lamont Roach could duck him. Eduardo Nunez, he deserves a fight. He's been ducked, dodged forever. And then Charlie Surley, the tough up-and-coming Filipino fighter, right? Not bad. I don't know who this guy is. It should be Albert. Oshaki, Albert, Nunez, and Suarez. Difficult competition, right? Now we come here. We got Robson Ramirez, Stephen Fulton, Komoki Kameda. The majority of Americans don't know who Komoki Kameda is. He was relevant literally like 8 years ago. I don't know what he's done since then. Goodman, MJ, Picasso. I will tell you, I've never even heard of Picasso up until probably a month ago. I don't know who he beat. I don't know what he's done to be put in this position. Goodman, he beat some good guys. He beat Reese fucking Alim. Reese Alim, who the usual suspects, or sorry, the ignorant Americans were saying was the best fighter in the division. He beat him. Now we got this guy. There he is. He's right there. Number one mandatory. But he's getting hated on because he fought his mandatory, right? You know, Roman Gonzalez, all mandated to fight a world title fight. But of course, if he gets a title fight, they're going to shit on him and say he doesn't deserve a world title fight. You know, like you see these kind of things throughout the rankings when you find fighters where there's nobody listed, or, you know, it's fighters that we've never heard of, fighters that, you know, deserve opportunities like Hansboy, but then fighters literally open-ended Chinese guys. I don't know if we've ever seen them fight other dudes that are unknown. Like, this is just boxing sanctioning bodies. They consistently do this. It is what it is. Is this a reason to criticize the fighter? Right? You see, Canelo consistently got criticized for that. AJ consistently got criticized for that. Why? Because of ignorant Americans. Ignorant David Benavidez fans, so-called fans, shitting on Canelo, so then criticizing him for fighting his mandatories. Ignorant American fans, Deontay Wilder fans, who are shitting on AJ for ducking Wilder, even though he's fighting his mandatories, right? You know, you risk being stripped like Canelo just was stripped by the IBF if you don't fight your mandatories, unless, of course, your name is Charlo and Spence. And then you can have a mandatory for 3 or 4 years, never be forced by the IBF to ever fight that guy. So, you know, the biggest story is not the fighters. The story is the politics, the promotional situations, these fucked up sanctioning bodies. Those really should be the people that get scrutinized and criticized more than the fighters do. Is this about race? I can go over YouTube and the only people I see criticizing Shakur Stevenson are Tank Davis fans. Literally. Of course, people were disappointed with his less than stellar performance, but nonetheless it was. He was literally going to fight a guy coming off of a knockout loss in his next fight. Nobody really criticized him for that at all. At least Junto Nakatani wasn't fighting a guy who literally got knocked out in the division below and then fucking jumped up to the division above and got a world title fight right off the bat, like Errol Spence. No one's criticizing Errol Spence getting a world title fight coming off of a knockout loss. Nobody criticized Funduro or, you know, getting a world title fight coming off of a knockout loss. Like, we've seen a lot of guys come off knockout losses and jump right into world title fights. Danny Garcia literally jumped up 2 weight divisions to fight Erislandy Lara for a world title, even though he didn't do fuck all at 154, never fought at 160, but somehow he earned a world title fight. How? Oh, I know why. Because name recognition means it's a pay-per-view fight or a fight you can put on a pay-per-view that's going to generate more buys to the American market. That's why he got those fights. A lot of these other mandated opponents, unknown to the American audience, they don't sell. If you don't do what historically we always think sanctioning bodies should force you to do, fight 2 or 3 guys in the top 15 to gradually elevate yourself to that mandatory position, no one's going to know who you are, right? Literally, the guy at 140, Puelo, who earned a fight with the monster from Puerto Rico, he literally beat 2 top-ranked fighters by the IBF. And by doing that, he put himself in position to earn a fight with the killer from Puerto Rico, who a lot of people weren't eager to jump in the ring with. He went in, beat him, became a world title champion, right? He literally did what he should do. But it's not like people are high on him. Nobody's acting like he's the best fighter at 140, right? Right now, it's not him that you know, made Devin Haney duck, right? It wasn't Devin Haney. Devin Haney didn't duck him. Why would Devin Haney duck him? Apparently, Devin Haney thinks he's going to get $10 million to fight an unknown Australian fighter for his world title. Go fight Sandor Martin, win back your world title. and then have something to bring to the table for a unification fight. That would be good. That sounds excellent. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think Junto Nakatani is being unfairly moved forward based on the fact that he's Asian and he's not being criticized for his less than stellar mandatory opponent because he's not Black American, because Tank Davis is held to more heavy scrutiny than he is? Like, the irony with that statement is Tank Davis's mandatory right now is who? William Cepeda. Did he offer William Cepeda a contract to step in the ring? I never heard it. Did you hear it? And number 2 is Floyd Schofield. I didn't hear him make Floyd Schofield an offer. And number 3, it's fucking Edwin De Los Santos. I definitely did not hear him make De Los Santos an offer. And number 4, it's Andy fucking Cruz. Don't tell me Andy Cruz wouldn't jump at the opportunity to face fucking Tank Davis for the WBA title. Gold medal winner, beat fucking Keyshawn Davis 3 times in major amateur tournaments. That dude wouldn't jump at a chance to fight Tank Davis? Please. There's literally 4 dudes ranked by the WBA that would all be better opponents than fucking WBA champion Lamont Roach Jr., who's ducking Albert Bataguev, who would fucking also beat his ass. When Lamont Roach comes down after he gets knocked out by Tank Davis, he's going to then get knocked out by Albert Bataguev, who potentially is the best fighter at 130 pounds. I wonder if Tank Davis is going to pull Albert up. I would like that fight. But, of course, Albert is not going to get any recognition because he's not a Black American. So, obviously, he's a hype job. He ain't that good, even though he's a gold medal winner and already in world title contention in less than 10 world title fights. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about all this jazz? Do you agree or disagree with me or the ignorant American? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. If you're not a subscriber, click, hit the bell, help a brother out. Thanks for watching. Peace out.